Alright, I was just unpacking this pack, which is a Paddy Power pack from around about the 1940s, okay? I thought it was a really good opportunity just to shoot a video and show you this old school traditional kind of loadout, alright? And this is very much the kind of kit that would have been used in Australia around about, late 40s, early 50s, okay? Before really, plastic and nylon became the norm, alright? We're still in the era of leather and canvas, okay? And what I've done with this kit, and I've done quite a lot of research into it, it's not just have a kind of generic old-fashioned kit, right? Just like any old-fashioned pack. I've kind of gone for what really people would have used in this time period in the eastern coast of Australia, right? And the two big things that people used was army surplus gear, which was mainly kind of British, Canadian, and Australian pattern 37, old Second World War issue gear like drink bottles and boots and stuff like that. And also the other big thing that was big in this part of the world at that time was the Paddy Power gear, alright, who was a guy who made camping gear and bushwalking gear. So I've been scouring markets and Gumtree and salvos and all that kind of stuff. I've got together, I think, was a really good representation of what traditionally a bloke in the Australian bush going out would have used around about 70 years ago, okay? And I'll take you through the gear and I'll show you, and it's a really nice little collection of vintage items. Alright, I thought I'd give you a walk by of all the kit together, just so you get a bit of an overview of what the entire loadout looked like. So this is everything, including clothes, obviously, right? And the pack weight for this loadout was around about 15 kilograms, okay, without water. Okay, so this is pretty much everything except food, alright, and pretty much everything is a vintage item, okay. There's one piece of reproduction items, but really anything that was a modern piece of equipment was just there for safety, okay. So I had a vintage torch, for example, but I also took a little LED. I had a mobile phone and I had a modern compass, okay, and also I had a little poncho, just an emergency poncho, okay, in case there was a problem with the rain gear or there was a problem with the shelter, okay, because hadn't really been tried out, okay. So there was a little bit of safety gear, but apart from that, all vintage items, okay, from the 1940s, 1950s, or as close as you can get. It's a little bit heavy, a few mistakes were made for sure, but this is just a little bit of an overview, okay. I will be changing things in future, but I'll just go, it's probably going to be quite a long video, so I'll just get stuck into it. I'll probably start just by looking at the pack. I do love this pack, it's a really beautiful piece of equipment, totally outdated, totally antiquated, but that's kind of part of its charm, do you know what I mean? So we really can't talk about outdoor equipment in Australia without mentioning Paddy Power. Okay, he was the man. So that was a local company set up in 1930, and really the heyday of Paddy Power and the Paddy made gear was from 1930 through to about the 1950s, okay. And essentially what he did was he made gear that was basically the same sort of stuff that was being made in Europe, but made it locally and made it cheaper, so it's much more accessible to ordinary people. All right, the guy was a legend in his own lifetime. He wrote a lot of books as well. This is one of his bushwalking guides I picked up, and I've kind of based my gear on some of his kind of recommendations. Do you know what I mean? So the pack itself, right? This is the Bushwalker model, and it's an A-frame pack. Alright, and I think this would probably be one of the largest capacity packs that Paddy would have made, Paddy Power. So it's your A-frame design. I mean, not to knock Paddy Power, right? The guy's a legend, but really all he was doing was just copying what was happening in Europe, right? All his designs of his packs and his tents and stuff like that. It was just, you know, his version of European stuff, right? And this A-frame design was really, really popular through the 20s into the 50s, okay? And there's many, many different A-frame packs, right? They're all roughly based on the Norwegian Bergen, alright? So, with actually using this pack, there's actually quite a difference between, you know, let's just load it up with enough for a day hike, do you know what I mean? And have like 5 kilograms in it or 4 kilograms and really load it up to a full load, okay? And have like 15 kilograms in it, you know, have everything old school, like, you know, a canvas tarp and, you know, tins of food and, you know, a heavier sleeping bag. So when I was using this pack, I had it up to about 15 kilograms, just under that, and that's quite a lot for this pack, and it does get a little bit old really fast, okay? If I was going to do that, I would be looking at about 10 k's a day. You know, you really can't argue that this pack is as comfortable or as good as a modern pack, alright? So if you're kind of using this kind of gear, you've got to take that into consideration, do you know what I mean? You don't want to be doing a multi-day hike using this pack with, you know, 15 kilograms of gear in it, alright? That would be a real killer, do you know what I mean? That being said, it does do the job, alright? It is quite quirky and it has a few kind of drawbacks with the design. That's common to all kind of A-frame packs, okay? One of the main things is that all the weight is kind of at the back, alright? With modern thinking, you've got the weight here at shoulder height, but back in the day it was all down here on your lower back, on your lumbar, and it kind of tends to make you want it to slouch. Gives you bad posture, really. You kind of do this, alright, and you tend to put your thumb in there in the straps, and it certainly takes its toll, do you know what I mean? It's not as comfortable as a modern pack, like I said, do you know what I mean? I have a few issues with rubbing here, alright, on this part of the frame. It gives me a few hot spots, do you know what I mean? But just, I think that's part of the thing about using this vintage gear. You know, it's just you kind of get an idea of how people did it, alright? And certainly people didn't go as far in one day as they do today with modern kit, right? The kit was heavier, it wasn't comfortable, so, you know, people walked less distances, you know what I mean? And certainly if you're fitter, it's easier, do you know what I mean? You know, and sometimes you just got to suck it up when you use this gear, you know what I mean, and just get on with it and not whinge about it. But I do love this pack, man. It's a real beauty, real little bit of local history. I've just got a modern pack here, right? This is a bit of a day hike size pack made by Mountain Designs, but you know, this just kind of shows you how far the technology has come, right, and how far we've travelled, do you know what I mean? Because if we look at this pack here, you know, there isn't one piece of natural material in it, right? It's all nylon and plastic, okay? If we look at, you know, the Paddy made pack, you know, the entire thing is made, there's a little bit of metal there, but, you know, we've got rope, right, we've got leather, you know, we've got canvas. So I mean, they're complete opposite scales, you know, in terms of materials, you know what I mean? Alright, let's look at some sleeping gear and shelter type gear. So this is my sleeping bag, alright, my vintage sleeping bag, or one of my vintage sleeping bags, alright. I'm a bit of a geek, right? So this is really cool. This is a Paddy Power sleeping bag from sometime in the 60s, alright. And this is very similar to what was being made in the 1950s, okay? And in the kind of early 50s, there was a real switch away from using wool blankets, and people crossed over to using sleeping bags just simply because they're warmer and they got a better night's sleep, do you know what I mean? I get on alright with this sleeping bag. It works for me. It's pretty primitive by today's standards, but personally I'm quite a warm sleeper. And this works for me fine, do you know what I mean? I've slept in this a fair few times, do you know what I mean? I'd like to get it re-loft, but I'm not sure where you would go to get that done, do you know what I mean? There's a really cool bit of kit, do you know what I mean? And this is a waxed cotton, alright, type material, okay, that it's made from. It's not made from modern nylon, do you know what I mean? But the problem with all this sleep gear now, there's 3 pieces of gear that I'm going to show you. So there's a rain cape, there's a half shelter, and this acts as a ground sheet as well. The problem was the weight, alright, so that got me up 5 kilos. 5 kilos was about the weight of the sleep system, shelter system, okay? So it's far too heavy, so I'm going to alter that in future. But I'm just trying to be as authentic as I can, right? So it went in a bit heavy again. I'll probably change this round and maybe use a more military style poncho, an older style military poncho, okay? So this is the rain cape, which is very, very quirky, okay? Rain capes, something you don't see anymore, alright? There's the odd ultralight hiking rain cape, but they've kind of gone out of service. So this was used by the British Army and the Commonwealth Australian Army, First and Second World War, okay? And this is a military issue rain cape. There were bushwalking civilian rain capes being made, alright? And they seem to be in a little bit more lightweight, and they seem to be in a little bit longer, alright? Because they were designed to take a bigger pack, alright? But that's as close as I could get, alright? Obviously try to find a 1940s hiker's rain cape. It's almost impossible. So this is as close as I got, and certainly some of these would have been used, some of them would have been pressed into service. It's a very quirky piece of kit. I don't really like it, I have to say. I would rather just have a regular poncho, do you know what I mean? It's just awkward to use, and it's incredibly bulky and heavy. It really bulks out the pack. You know, if you compare to a modern poncho, do you know what I mean? Really, really lightweight and really compact, and this thing is just a leviathan of a thing, man. It's really big and bulky. So this is your ground sheet, and that's your waterproof, right? And then, you know, as you can see, it's a bit of a pain in the bum. So I took an American half shelter, okay? And I've used this a few times, but I've used it a little bit more like car camping type things, you know what I mean? It's just bulky and heavy again, alright? These are the 2 items I'd probably change, or I'd probably modernise, do you know what I mean, a little bit, just to keep the weight down, do you know what I mean? So the half shelter, so basically this is, again, this is a bit of military issue kit, right? But half shelter is basically half a tent, half a pup tent, and what I saw in a lot of the old photographs, and I spent a lot of time looking at old photographs of people bushwalking and people in the bush, you know, in the 40s and 50s, and what a lot of people seem to have done is they took a tent, right? A tent was the #1 shelter system for sure. They took a tent, but they improvised the poles, okay? So they just hacked down a few branches and used rocks and whatever instead of tent pegs, alright? And, you know, that really makes a lot of sense, you know, to keep the weight down rather than carrying, you know, 6 of them or whatever and a couple of poles. So that was, I think that was very much in keeping with how people would have done it. And if it was just one guy, he might have just had, you know, a bit of canvas or whatever, half a tent, do you know what I mean? Works really good, right? Really good bit of kit, and these are pretty cheap as well. Just heavy, that's the issue. Heavy and bulky, right? So I will be changing that. Probably maybe try and get a couple of military style ponchos, hopefully vintage ones. If anybody's got any really cool vintage gear they don't want, send it to me. But sleeping bag really worked for me. Personally, I find it quite hard to sleep in a blanket. It's a skill I've not really acquired. I'll show you some of the kind of cooking gear that I was using with this loadout. I have to say there was no titanium spock. Alright, it makes you appreciate things, you know. I mean, this is just weighs nothing. You know, you can use it as a spoon, you can use it as a fork, right? But back in the day, just a piece of mum's cutlery. Do you know what I mean? This is so heavy. Do you know what I mean? So I did a lot of research with cooking gear. The 3 things people always seem to take was a little frying pan, alright, a billy, and a tin or enamel mug. Frying pan I gave a miss, right? And I think the frying pan, you got to remember this is 1940s, 1950s. Just people ate a lot more fried food, fried eggs, fried bacon, black pudding, fried bread, all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit of a kind of cultural difference today from what we use. We don't really do that much fried food anymore, but just it was almost an everyday thing for everybody to have a fried lunch or fried breakfast. So I gave the frying pan a miss. The billy, obviously, I took with me. Actually, I didn't take this billy. Took this guy, alright. I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to billy cans, I have to say. So it's really hard to get Australian made billy cans anymore, right, which is a little bit sad. Most of them are made in China, right. Most of the kind of cheaper ones anyway. This is an authentic Australian billy can from around maybe around about the 1960s, and this is the one I took with me, which I really wanted to use because it was really close to the period I was trying to recreate. You know, I had like a little Bakelite lid there and stuff. Do you know what I mean? A little bit too big, has to be said. This is over 3 pints, so it's not really a realistic size for one person. Good for water sterilization, but a little bit too big for the pack, a little bit bulky. Probably use this one in future, okay, which is a little bit smaller. It's a bit more of a realistic size for one person. This is made by Cecil & Co, which is a very good billy can. Alright, it's one of the few Australian made billy cans out there. Really nice little bit of kit. So most people would have an enamel or a tin mug. A lot of people just used a military style, what looks like a military style tin mug. I just made mine, okay, just out of some junk, you know what I mean. Drink bottles, there were kind of non-military drinks bottles being used, alright. I'm yet to find a photograph of one or see one in the flesh, okay. I've just read about them from kind of gear lists and price lists from the period, you know, like lists of gear. They seem to have been kind of like this kind of thing, just aluminium, alright, with you know, either a Bakelite lid or a metal lid, alright, but I've yet to find a real example, alright, but certainly a lot of people would have used this, and this is the drink bottle used by the British and the Australian Army in both the First and the Second World War, do you know what I mean? I carried mine with the sling, with the pack, which actually worked quite well because it took a little bit of the weight out the pack. And also took another little drink bottle, which is a military style drink bottle. This is a Swedish Army drink bottle, and it's pretty similar to what was used by the Germans in both the First and the Second World War. So there were probably things like that were pressed into service, do you know what I mean, in this kind of time period, you know what I mean. With kind of actual food itself, alright, what a lot of people seem to have done is they would have cooked sausages or cooked meat at home, put it in the pack, and then headed out to the bush and then reheated. So you might have cooked some sausages and then cut it up and used some stock cubes and made maybe chuck an onion and a potato in there and made kind of a stew in your billy or something like that. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people seem to have cooked meat and then took it into the bush for 1 or 2 days. Do you know what I mean? But certainly a lot of people would used tins, you know what I mean, tins of stew, you know, things like luncheon meat and stuff like that, corned beef, you know what I mean. Certainly that's pretty, I mean, canning is a very good method of preservation for food. It's just the weight, obviously it's very heavy, do you know what I mean. But I think that's quite a good kind of representation of the kind of gear that somebody would have used in this time period, the kind of cooking gear and the kind of, you know, hydration system. I haven't found much mention of water sterilization, okay. Now I did have some aqua tabs with me, but basically I just boiled all my water. What I think probably would have been used would have been iodine. You know, people would have just put iodine in their drink bottles for water sterilization. There's really no such thing as a traditional Australian knife. You know, there's no Australian equivalent of a Bowie knife or a Cutlery, okay. That being said, in this time period, one of the big differences was that knives was still being manufactured in Australia, okay. That's not really the case anymore. The manufacturing base is gone. But certainly in this time period, as well as some knives being of domestic origin, there was a lot of knives imported into the country, okay, and that would have been quite a variety of cutlery available, okay. As far as the bush goes and the general attitude, most people's attitude would be that if you're going camping, you're going to go spend time in the bush, you want to take some kind of fixed blade knife, alright, and that fixed blade knife, you know, good stout knife would be one of many different types of things, you know what I mean. It could be a knife similar to this Green River style knife. I've certainly seen a few knives similar to that in antique shops. Certainly military knives were used in the bush as well, you know, old army knives, even bayonets, okay, and certainly hunter style knives, you know what I mean, antler handled German style hunting knives were used. So there's a huge variety of, you know, fixed blade knives were used, and folders as well. This is the folder I used, which is sort of similar to the Australian Army jackknife or clasp knife. And you know, one of the important things to have, of course, was a tin opener, okay. And what I've noticed with some of the knives that I've seen second hand, they'll have a tin opener built into them, fixed blade knife, so you just have here and you have a tin opener cut into the blade, which is quite an unusual feature. With regard to axes, okay, axes were occasionally walked into the bush, alright, but it's a lot of weight for what it does. It's not such a useful tool in the Australian bush, so most people would have probably left it at home. I mean, these are the tools I used, alright, which were going in a little bit heavy, so I had two fixed blade knives in a folder, and I also had an axe, okay. I don't think this axe would have been fairly typical of the kind of axe that would have been used in the 1940s and 1950s. Probably an English axe would have been probably more common, and maybe Australian made axe like a Kelly or something like that. But I think these kind of tools represent the kind of thing that would have been kicking around when people did bush back in the day. So there you go, guys. That was quite an in-depth look at sort of the gear from this period, and these are really the last days of canvas and leather when it comes to outdoor gear, and I think that's a really pretty accurate representation of the kind of gear that would have been used here around about that time. Hope you enjoyed the videos. Please leave a comment. It's turned out into a bit of a long one, sorry about that. Anybody's got any of this old gear kicking around they don't want, give me a shout. Maybe we could work out a deal or something like that. I'm always very interested in these kind of older, more historical pieces of equipment. But thanks a lot for watching. Please leave a comment of what you think of the gear, and if you think I've been historically quite accurate to that time period. Catch you next time, guys.